Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is Mike from DynamicPoint. Today, we'll be going through automating AP invoices with Microsoft Teams. We'll give it another minute or so here, just till we reach the top of the hour, and then go ahead and get started. It'll be a quick session, so we'll move fast. We'll give it one more minute. Thank you again for joining. Okay, looks like my clock here is saying top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started, keep things on schedule. Again, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day. Today's subject matter, or I should say topic, is automating AP invoices using Microsoft Teams. My name is Mike Marson. I'm the Director of Business Development for DynamicPoint. As far as our agenda today, we just have a few slides to go through to sort of set the context of what it is that we'll be discussing today. And then we'll go directly into the demonstration of how we're going to automate AP invoices using Teams. So really quick, an introduction of who DynamicPoint is. We're a software company that has been in business for 11 years now. And our focus has been extending the reach of ERP and CRM systems using Office 365. Obviously, Office 365 hasn't been around for that long, so our history takes us from a SharePoint foundation back in SharePoint 2010 and the previous other versions that followed it. We used to develop SharePoint products for on-premise SharePoint. And then about 5 years ago, we rewrote all of our applications on this Office 365 framework. So all of our products have been recreated for this new framework, namely Office 365. So even though we've been around for a little bit, our products are using the latest and greatest of technology. So that's a brief history on who we are. As far as our product lineup, we have a portal application that allows sharing data from your ERP or CRM system on a Office 365 SharePoint extranet. And that same product can be used for enabling a customer, vendor, or employee portal. It could actually do all of those with the same product. And it is basically using this Office 365 SharePoint and intranet or extranet idea and adding to that the collaboration of data from your ERP or CRM product. We also have an employee expense application that takes expense entry, receipt capture, and workflow, as well as ERP integration. Today's focus is this center one, the Easy AP 365, which is our invoice automation product built entirely on Office 365. Again, today we will be showcasing that from a Microsoft Teams perspective. So we're going to go through each step of this workflow, the invoice receipt workflow, OCR, AP management, and ERP integration directly from Microsoft Teams. Just a little bit about our product approach and sort of what makes us different. We're fairly unique in the marketplace in that we are entirely built on this Office 365 platform. So the analogy I like to use is if you think about an app that you install on your mobile phone, the first thing that happens is when you install that application on your mobile phone, it asks if you could use all these features of your mobile device. Can I use the camera? Can I use such things as location services, etc. So there's all these various aspects that your product is using on the mobile platform. And we do that same thing, but we're obviously not using an Android or iPhone platform. We're using Office 365. So we're leveraging this ecosystem to basically provide all this functionality with our product. So in the case of invoice automation, we are developing our own products that are installed as a SharePoint app. So there's no installation in the traditional sense. We're not installing it on a server or anything of that nature, but it is added to your Office 365 environment as an app. For workflow, we're using Power Automate, which is Microsoft's workflow tool, previously called Flow, for such things as, for the invoice world, check request forms and things where we're trying to capture specific data in a mobile or tablet or computer, browser basis. We're using Power Apps. For gathering additional details, such things as like vendor onboarding forms, we're using Forms. And lastly, for analytics, we're using Power BI. So we're using every element of this framework to provide our applications functionality that we don't have to build, which is the benefit. And it's usually all features that our customers already own because it comes with their Office 365 subscription. Okay, now to discuss the invoice automation process that we are going to be reviewing from Microsoft Teams. Basically, there's 3 steps involved in this process. The first step is this invoice receipt, and that is us getting the invoice from a vendor, in this case, into the system. And we have different methods. We have email, we have a check request form. This is more geared towards internal users submitting this invoice. We have a mobile upload capability. We have a portal site that you could enter it from, etc. And today, of course, we'll be looking at this specifically from Teams, as well as the ability to upload that invoice to Teams. So those are the various methods that are going into this invoice library. And this is the first step, right? So the first step is we're capturing that receipt from a various submission method from a vendor, of course. It could be submitted either internally or based on external users, in the case of the vendor themselves. And that prepares us for this next step. This next step is processing. The processing step will take us through the account assignment, OCR, as well as workflow, review and approval, matching of this with the vendor specific details, PO matching if applicable, if you're doing POs within your ERP product. And that prepares us for the third and final step, which is bringing that invoice into the accounting system. That is where we call the web services of the accounting system, and we call those web services and create this invoice depending on whether or not it's a PO match or a miscellaneous invoice that's not related to a PO if you're not doing purchasing within your ERP product. So those are the steps we're going to go through today using Teams. So enough of the introduction. We could jump right into it and open up Microsoft Teams. So here's my Teams channel that I've set up, just called it General Invoice Automation for the sake of simplicity. I have various tabs going across the top here that represent different phases or steps in the process of invoice automation. And those steps are corresponding to the 3 that I just introduced. The first one being receipt, of which we could show different methods of uploading it. The second step being the processing of it, and then the third and final step being the integration of that invoice with the ERP product as a approved, and then all the accounts assigned, etc., to that invoice. So let's hit the first tab here. I have an AP processing dashboard. And the sort of hard part of going through this from my perspective is I'm going to sort of cover different roles in this processing demo here. So I'm going to cover not only from a AP person managing this process, but as well as a submission or a submitter, I should say, of an invoice, as well as a reviewer. So I'm really going to cover different facets of the invoice automation. And because of that, I'm playing different roles. So it may get a little bit confusing, but I'll try to call out which role I'm playing before I go into it. So the dashboard is really available for all roles. The dashboard is provided by our product, and the various calls to action you see here correspond to those steps in the invoice automation process. So I see the received invoices; those are the invoices that are coming from the vendors and coming into the system. So it's sort of the inbound folder, if you will. I see the processing queue of those that I am processing from a review perspective and account assignment as well as vendor. And then the last one is those that have already integrated with the ERP product. If I scroll down, I have a simple Power BI report here showing the unapproved invoices by vendor total. So basically that is using the data within our system to create a simple Power BI report showing those vendors that have the most invoices outstanding, as well as an aging of the invoices in the system. So again, using Office 365 technology, all that is very configurable, not necessarily proprietary to us. We're using those tools in conjunction with our product. Okay, so we're going to go through the various steps. So we're going to start on the first one being receiving of the invoice. Now, most commonly, the invoice is coming in directly from the vendor, and it's probably coming in via email or maybe paper, and then it's being scanned. There's also a use case for this distributed and buying environment where people within the field, like managers, et cetera, are also submitting those invoices. So we're going to talk about that first. So I'm going to go to my Submit Invoice tab. Again, the call out what this is the SharePoint app that is included with Teams, just looking at a specific document library that I have as being that inbound folder for all invoices coming into the system. And you can see here I have a separate folder called Uploaded from Teams. You don't have to have a separate folder. I created a separate one just for the sake of having a separate workflow on it, just purely for the use in this demonstration, but there's no need. Obviously, I could have them organized however I want, separate folders, or just a single folder that everyone can submit invoices into. So I can drag and drop folders or files here or invoices, or just click my upload button. I'm going to go ahead and pick an invoice and simply upload it. And you can see here it's been uploaded. Of course, I could click on that, see the invoice I just submitted from the Acme Corporation. So, that in itself is probably not impressive. I just uploaded an invoice to a document library. What is interesting what's going on in the background now. This invoice is actually being submitted to an OCR process to recognize fields or extrapolate data from that invoice. And the easiest way to do that is go ahead and open it up within the SharePoint interface, because I could hit refresh here a bunch of times. Oh, there we go, we got it. So what you can see there is the OCR process returned metadata that has been extrapolated from this invoice. So just purely by me uploading it, again, there's the simple invoice, it was submitted to an OCR process that then recognized various data that was mapped, obviously, from the OCR tool. And that information was then populated back into this library. So I was able to capture myself as the submitter, the company name based off of my domain. Here I have a standard subject, just invoice submitted from Teams, got the invoice number, the amount, the date, as well as this key here, which was assigned. This key was assigned by my email and is going to be used to apply a template in our application. So I currently have the template set up based on the email submitter or the company. You don't have to have that, but I will go into that a little bit later when we go look at the invoice after it's been created in our product, as well as brought into the accounts and other financial elements that we'll need prior to integrating this invoice. So as you noticed, it disappeared. The reason it disappeared is that it went on to the next step, the processing step. So we will go back to Teams, because that's of course where our demo is. And that was just, again, an upload, right? So again, we're focusing on this first step of how do I get this invoice into the library. Other methods, again, this is more common, typically what we see. Of course, it's not originating from Teams, so it's sort of going against our theme of today. But a vendor could, again, submit this invoice directly from an email to a shared inbox. So this is going to apautomation@dynamicpoint.com. And if I were to go ahead and send my email, we'll set aside Teams for 1 second. And then I go to my received invoices. You can see here, I'm going to receive a new one. Should come in here within a second or so. I'm a little bit quick for it. Oh, I'm sorry, there it is. I'm one right in front of consulting invoice. I apologize. So this was the one that was received. So again, that came in from the email, and we again submitted it to OCR and extrapolated data on the invoice itself. So again, just another method of doing it, coming from an email. If I like the idea of using Teams, but I wanted to capture more specifics on the invoice itself, we could have a more regimen process, if you will, of a check request form. I mentioned we do use Power Apps for various applications. This is a simple Power App in which I could also submit that invoice. So I can say material for farm. So this was actually developed for one of our customers that's a farm. And they wanted to submit these various invoices, but they wanted a user who's submitting it to code it to different things, such as the crop, the farm, etc. And these attributes that you could see are not only capturing things that will ultimately be used from a workflow perspective, but they're also assigning various GL accounts and other underlying financial objects that exist within the ERP system. So this is a little bit different method than the simple upload because I'm asking the user to complete details that I could then use. So it's similar in that the end user is still submitting the invoice, the difference being that I could capture more details during the submission than just a simple upload. So maybe I don't have to rely so heavily on OCR being required. Welcome. So that was the submission process. Again, I could access that same thing from my dashboard here and go into those received invoices. But we will go ahead and now move to the next step, which is the processing of the invoices. The processing of the invoices is going to entail some various financial specifics. Oops. Looks like it timed out on me. I apologize. Let me go ahead and refresh. Okay, there we go. So this is the invoice that just got created based off of the one that I uploaded. And I know it just got created because it has the status of auto created here. The vendor was assigned based on the email, or my user, I should say, that I submitted it from. And then I was able to extrapolate additional details from the OCR process. So I was able to get the amount, the date, the invoice number, etc. The financial accounts that you're seeing defaulted here actually came from a template that I have configured in the system. Now, if this was a PO match, there would be no accounts because I would be matching it to purchase order items. And there's, we don't have time to go through PO match today, so we're just focused on a non-PO invoice. And in this case, like I said, I had the accounts default based on a template in the system. There's no necessity to default these accounts. They could be assigned as part of a workflow process as well as an admin. But in this case, I defined them based on a template. So I could edit them here if I want to. And I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce. Now at this point, I'm typically a AP manager who's managing the invoices. So changing hats a little bit on you. The previous step of the submission, of course, was most likely a manager submitting that invoice into the system. The email was most likely coming from a vendor. And now I'm putting on a different hat here and being an AP person who's managing the flow of these through the workflow as well as the account assignment. So the account here is coming from a concatenation of drop-down fields that we call categories. So you can see the account here is actually changing based on when I pick different categories. Your account could be based off of these categories as well as assigned directly. So again, mine came from a template. Now that I have this invoice in our system and it's been captured, I could look at such things as the details here. That was the description, as well as notes and audits, etc. The audits are going to be pretty simple because there hasn't been any workflow kicked off yet. It's just a creation of the invoice. But we're going to do just that. We're going to kick it off for the workflow process, which is going to submit this invoice for a review. So again, we're on that second step that I first introduced, the processing of the invoice. So we'll go ahead and click submit. See, I received a confirmation that workflow was submitted on that correctly. And I am going to do one more too, by the way, just so we have a couple to look at. And then for the sake of this, I'm going to make the invoice number different on it. And so we'll go ahead and put 623, something like that. And I'll change the date on it as well, just to make it unique, just so I have a couple going through the process. And we'll go ahead and submit that one as well. All right, so what that did is kick off a workflow, and it's going to assign me tasks to review and approve. Again, the theme of today is doing this all from Teams. So I actually will get emails notifying me of these approval steps, as well as a notification on my mobile phone. But today's theme, we're just looking at it from the Teams perspective. So I'm going to open up the Power Automate app, otherwise known as Flow, from the Teams interface. And my user should have new tasks that just got assigned to them. So again, I'm changing hats on you. I am taking the AP automation hat off and putting on the end reviewer. So we're covering all aspects of this invoice review process today across the various people of the company. So you can see here's the two that I just submitted. So I have a task assigned to me, and from this interface, I can approve it, reject it, reassign it, as well as click this review link. We could also actually attach the invoice directly to this task as well. But if I drill back to the application, I get the opportunity to do a little bit more. And what happens when I drill back to the application is we actually applied permissions of this user to determine whether or not they have edit rights to the invoice. So a reviewer can actually edit this invoice as it's going through a review process. So that's why you see that. So if this was a PO match, I could go in here and edit the line items pertaining to the PO match. Since it's not a PO match, I could edit these items as they pertain to the account assignment. I will also see the audits. Again, the audits are each step in the workflow process. So this is the one I just kicked off for workflow. So you can see it started an approval. As well as notes. Notes are those entered by the reviewers. There hasn't been any notes entered at this point in time. And of course, I could see the attachment itself, the invoice that got created. So we are going to go back to our friend Teams and say that this invoice looks good. And I'm going to go ahead and approve it directly from the Teams app. And I'm going to go back to my channel in Teams. And go to my processing dashboard. So what should happen here is it'll be out of my view, but if I clear my filter here, I could see I have these new invoices that just got submitted. So here was the one that I altered the date on so I could easily identify it, and you can see the status is submitted. And what that means is the invoice has been submitted to the ERP product. So if I were to expand this and sort of look at the details on what's changed, the notes that I entered, of course, got captured, right? So those were the notes that were entered by my user, DynamicPoint demo. This invoice looks good, as well as the date and time stamp. The audits have each step of the review process. So here's each step of the review process that it went through, who took action on it, whether or not it was approved or rejected. as well as you see a permissions tab. So this dashboard is dynamic, actually, based on who's logged into the system. So it only shows the invoices that I either submitted or I'm a reviewer of. So that's where the permissions come into play on each of these. I'm only seeing those that I reviewed from a managerial perspective or submitted. And the last tab you see here is the ERP details. Now we integrate with various ERP products because we're using this standard integration methodology. This happens to be Microsoft Dynamics, but you can see here this is the transaction that got created as well as the state of that transaction. Of course, for the various ERP products, this would show the ERP that it got integrated with as well as the transaction that ultimately got created when that final step in the approval process was complete. So that has now walked through the approval process and then ultimately integrated with the ERP. So unfortunately, I can't go too much into the ERP integration today, just because I don't have time to cover all of the products that we do integrate with. But note that we do put the details back, obviously, from the invoice perspective in our dashboard. You see them there, as well as we do include a link back to that invoice after it gets integrated with the ERP product. So if I were to go back to my slides really quick and just recap. So that was the receipt. So the receipt I uploaded from Teams, I sent an email as well. So we showed both of those, as well as showed the check request. The check request was the Power App form that allowed me to define drop-down values such that managers can now help me with account assignment. We went through the processing. The OCR results were returned to the library. So when it got added to the SharePoint library, it got submitted to a SharePoint compliant OCR process that returned the values for that invoice. And then it came into our application and applied a template. I submitted it for workflow, which routed it for an approval process, which I reviewed and approved from Teams. And then the last step is we saw it after it was integrated. The invoice was in a read-only fashion, and we included the details of the invoice after it got created in the ERP product. So those were the steps we went through. Just a recap of why we do this approach. Our goal here from a company is that we are providing all of the functionality that you could ever hope for from an invoice automation perspective, which includes the ERP integration, invoice repository. Obviously, from a SharePoint perspective, I could do versioning and all kinds of various tools from a document management perspective, the workflow, as well as OCR. The benefit of our approach is we get to focus really on one slice of this pie, right? Because the rest of it is being provided to us from Office 365. Everything else here, SharePoint, Microsoft Flow, the OCR integration is being provided to us by Office 365 as well as this ecosystem. And we get to focus specifically on making our products integrate with various ERP products, as well as the vendor templates and the functionality that's sort of core to that aspect of the process. So we'll keep it moving. I know we're almost out of time here. And one final slide here. Thank you very much for joining. If you do have any questions, submit them at info@dynamicpoint.com. I see some have submitted in the questions for the chat. I will email you a response if that's okay on those, just to keep this on time for everyone's sake, because I know we're coming up on our half-hour mark. Our website is dynamicpoint.com. You could actually schedule a demonstration directly from there as well. And my email is here too, so mmarson@dynamicpoint.com. So I hope you found it valuable. Thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day. And again, the questions that have been submitted on the GoToMeeting menu or functionality, GoToWebinar, I'm sorry, I will go ahead and reply to those via email just to keep this at time. So thank you all for joining. Have a great day, and please stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.